Welcome everyone to the Ohio Gun Collectors. I am a collector of Ohio guns, which is kind of strange and unique in the whole scheme of things. Guns that were made in Ohio. And my talk today is about how, why, and what happened for us to have guns made in Ohio, and what happened to the principal players, there were three of them, and what happened to the demise of the company that was building guns in Ohio. As the inventor of the guns, a Mr. Gross, held a patent, his 1859 patent for a breech mechanism for the gun. And of course, at this time, there are 40 plus patent arms inventors getting patents for all of their mechanisms. Mr. Gross has to be different than everybody else, and every other patent has to be different than everybody else. So you have no conformity, no uniformity in how things are being done. It's the wild realm of, I patented this, so I want to make this. The government at the time before the Civil War, back in the 1850s, the government was holding trials, and they were trying to find out what mechanism they would like that they could either buy your patent or get royalty rights to produce at the federal government arsenals to have one standardized arm. Back at this time, the federal government still wanted to have muzzle loaders. They thought that any other mechanism would waste ammunition. Hence, there are some guns out there that could have been very handy that the government didn't want you to have. Anything that fired more than one shot at a time, we don't want. You'll waste ammunition. So all these single shot guns. The magic of this gun, which was different, was that it was a breech loader. Breech loader with a cap on it. You still had to have a cartridge that you put in. You had to cap it. You had to cock it. You had to pull the trigger, pull the hammer back again, take the old cap off, hope everything worked in the ignition of your cartridge, and go from there. The inventors then submitted their patent guns for government trials, hoping to have their guns accepted as the standard government-produced arm. All of these trials, you can read about the trials, they're all public trials, so to speak. They posted all the results, and in basic concept, the inspectors and the ordnance board hated everything. But they hated some worse than others. They would declare this Gross mechanism that he first submitted to be wrong. It was too cumbersome, it was too hard, it was too likely to go out of order. They hated all those different guns, but they hated each one in a different level of unhappiness. So Gross immediately in the 1850s did not get a government contract. The particular mechanism and the caliber and cartridge style that each inventor used was different. You can't take the Gwynn and Campbell or the Cosmopolitan ammo and shoot it in any other brand. You can't take any other brand's ammo and shoot it in this gun. So as the inventor invented how he was going to do everything, he had to invent his ammo. Another complication for the government. By the time Civil War comes about, now enter some of the principal players. Mr. Henry Gross, who held the first original patent, he was our inventor, the Gross patent. He held the patent up in Tiffin, Ohio. While he was in Tiffin, Ohio, he had a gun shop with his father, who he learned the gunsmithing trade from, and his brother was also in the shop. So we know that there were at least 3 people in that shop making guns. Prior to the war, they had produced probably 350 to 400 guns, which is not a lot, but 3 guys working over the course of the 1850 years had produced about that many guns. Mr. Gross in Tiffin, Ohio. The next person to come along was Mr. Gwynn. Mr. Gwynn was a gas engineer. He would come to your town and say, I can create natural gas. You can now have street lights, you can have heating in your home, you can do all kinds of things with natural gas. He's in Tiffin, Ohio. His realm where he's at, the gas company he's setting up in Tiffin is fairly close to Mr. Gross's gun shop. In theory, he wanders into Mr. Gross's gun shop. Mr. Gross says, hey, I have a patent. Mr. Gwynn says, I'm an entrepreneur. Well, let's get together and see if we can't do something. So the two of them, submit guns to the gun trials. The government still says, no, no thanks. Mr. Gwynn, he's from Springfield, Ohio, but he's traveling around doing these gas companies. So we have two people so far in Ohio trying to do these things. While he's in Tiffin with Mr. Gross, they try to get the government contracts. They can't get it. Mr. Gwynn moves on down to Hamilton, Ohio to set up their gas company. Enter our third player, Mr. Campbell. Abner Campbell is the 7th richest man in Hamilton, Ohio. His brother's a U.S. Senator. He has money, connections. He has a wood mill, which will come in real handy. He has buildings to assemble things. Now, Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Campbell have worked with Mr. Gross, but Mr. Gross, he's the inventor, and he says, I'm not getting contracts. Somehow, Mr. Gwynn gets rights to the patent of Mr. Gross. Whether that was, hey, you owed me money and you give it to me, or here, I'll just assign it to you. Now, Mr. Gwynn has the assigned patent of Mr. Gross from 1859. Now, Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Campbell have decided that the Civil War has started, and let's go get some government contracts. Now it's a free-for-all. Every patent arm manufacturer writes to the government and says, we can give you guns. The government now is no longer going to be allowed to argue. The Ordnance Board can't argue with you that your mechanism is bad, it's not going to work, it's going to fail, your ammo's incorrect, nothing's interchangeable, we don't want you. They can't argue anymore. They're very unhappy. They can't get the arsenal of the federal government to build enough guns, so they're going to have to rely upon other patent arms manufacturers to not only manufacture the guns, but sell them to the government. So we have three principal Ohio people, Mr. Gross, Mr. Gwynn, and Mr. Campbell. Mr. Gross at this point has kind of stepped out. They are still using his original patent idea when they go to the federal government hoping for a Civil War contract. At this point, they get a contract for 1,140 guns, was their first contract. Now that they have a contract for 1,140 guns, they need to have a factory. They did not have a factory yet. So, Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Campbell, Mr. Gwynn the entrepreneur and Mr. Campbell the money man, they go out and they hire people. At the height of the factory, we know that they had at least 103 people working in a factory building the guns under the contract for the government. Of course, right away, they had to buy machinery, they had to hire people, and they also had to try to produce enough guns in the allotted government contract time, which they can't do. So they correspond back and forth with the government saying, you know, we really can't deliver these on the schedule. We said we could. Can we take a longer time? The government has no choice. Sure. Probably all these other patent manufacturers also had no ability to deliver on time frame their way either, but they're stuck with trying to do that. They immediately start building a factory. In the course of time, during the war years there, they had 3 different factories. They got bigger each time. They needed more production space, more time. They ultimately went and got more contracts from the federal government. By the end of the war, they had contracted for 9,240 guns. And this was over time periods from about 1861 up through their final deliveries were in 1863. In 1863, their final deliveries are coming at a time when all of the patent arms manufacturers are catching up and getting guns delivered. What happened to these guns that are getting sent now to arsenals? The guns probably aren't going to get distributed out. There was suddenly more guns than they needed. So a lot of the guns that when you find specimens of guns done by Gwynn and Campbell, you will find guns that can look absolutely brand new. That is true. They were in arsenals and never got issued. At the end of time, by 1905, the Spanish-American War is over. All the guns, the federal gun manufacturers have caught up. All these guns in arsenals get sold off. The original contract for Gwin and Campbell guns was for $27 a piece. When Gwin and Campbell were ready to ship the first 500 of the guns that they were going to send, they sent the Ordnance Board a letter inquiring, would you like for us to make any ammo for our guns for you? The Ordnance Board said, oops, we didn't remember that. So yes, we need ammunition for your gun, because it has to be a special bullet, has to be a special cartridge, has to be everything special just to this gun. So the government said, yeah, send us ammunition to match your guns. And they said, well, how much do you want for each gun? They said, well, send us 100 cartridges for each gun. These are single shot guns. You're not going to shoot really, really fast. But if we remember the axiom for muzzle loader guys, they were supposed to be able to shoot 3 shots in a minute in a muzzle loader. In a breech loader, the challenge would be, can you shoot any faster? Well, we would all hope. On these particular guns, the way they're made, and you're welcome to look at them here or come back out to the other display, and I'll take it and open it up. In theory, all of these cartridges had a bullet with a linen or paper cartridge. The linen or paper cartridge had been dipped in niter, and it would catch fire really fast with the cap that would explode, which is the progenitor of course, our modern-day cap guns. It's about that much powder in there that would flash enough spark to fire that cartridge. These guns, you had to drop the lever down. You had to take that very fragile cartridge out of your cartridge box. You had to, with your thumb, push it into the barrel up here, then close the breech block up behind it to secure it. You would then lose part of your eyebrows when it fires because the gas seal was not really good. If in the process of stiffing this in there and it tears or rips or jams when you put the breech block back up against it, you've just jammed the gun. What do? You grab something that you could beat it with. I have several guns of the Gwin and Campbells that have been beaten. They were battlefield pickups. They were battlefield pickups because when it jams and you beat it and it still won't open, you throw it down and go on. You now have a cartridge box full of bullets. Unless you pick up the right gun, the ammunition you're carrying doesn't do anything for you. So that was one of the things that when the trials board had looked at, they said, how can this gun have problems? The ordnance inspectors, when they first inspected, before they gave them the contract, they fired a couple shots and it jammed and they said, okay, it's junk. The next trial board that they brought the gun to, they brought a guy who knew how to operate it. It is said that he fired 500 shots in a row with no problem. 500 shots in a row, taking his time. He wasn't being shot back at. It wasn't raining. It wasn't snowing. He was educated on how it worked. Back at this time, most of the people who were issued guns like this or any of these guns, they never got to test fire them. They didn't give you ammunition to go practice with. Here's the gun, here's the ammunition. Use it only when necessary. So they would have been very unskilled at any particular mechanism in any gun that they were handed. As time went and as the company started producing guns, ideas from the field and some of the inspectors had said some of the mechanism didn't work right, so they changed it as they went on the fly through the years in the contracts. Some of the levers changed how they were attached. The breech blocks changed from complicated half a dozen parts down to just a solid piece. They moved screws to more stronger points. They changed different parts on the gun. When the gun was initially issued, it had a 900-yard sight for a carbine with a 40 grain powder bullet, 900 yards. They found out that that wasn't necessary, so they changed it to 600 yards. Oh, much better thing. Now you might even be able to see the bullet come in and catch it. So some of the things that they did is they made the changes in the guns through the course of the contracts were just practical applications for improving the gun a little bit, making it a better, more reliable gun. As time goes on in the realm of the contracts and all, there are a total of 9,240 some guns that were bought under contract. In the realm today, in the collecting realm today, we have, there's always guns, and I've had several people show me guns today that they have and talk to me about guns that they have. So there are a bunch of the 9,240 some guns still out there that did survive the war. Very few cartridges survived the war. Of the known examples of cartridge, there's probably just a handful of known cartridges that exist that are original cartridges for the guns. The government bought, ultimately through the years of the contracts, the government bought 6,300,000 cartridges from Gwin and Campbell. Now, things like that, we know that Gwin and Campbell had 3 different factories. Each time got bigger to produce more and faster and quicker. But somewhere, somehow, they had to have contracted out to have cartridges made. Because you would have had to hire people, teach them how to make the cartridges. You would have had to make the wooden blocks to ship the cartridges to the government. You would have had to procure caps from a cap maker to put with the cartridges to ship to the government. At some points during the war, there were shortages. As during any war, there were things that became hard to get. At one point, lead was hard to get because everybody's buying lead. At one point, caps were hard to get. The cap makers couldn't make caps fast enough for all the different guns that would have used a cap. The cartridges were made of linen or paper. At one point, the linen was hard to get. You had to soak it in the nitro to get it to be able to burn fast and all, and sometimes that was hard to get. Who made the cartridges? Who made 6,300,000 cartridges for the Gwin and Campbell Company by themselves? We don't know. It was subbed out somewhere to somebody. Probably a room full of ladies. The ladies were typically the ones that made cartridges. These are women sitting in long skirts in a room, messing with gunpowder, with somewhere along the way, some of that gunpowder is going to fall on the floor. Somewhere along the way, you don't wear hobnail boots to work. If you make a spark, the room goes boom. There's many stories and books out about the ladies that made cartridges, and yes, the room went boom. Most of the people that made cartridges, their rooms and buildings that they built on brick on the outside and a very flimsy roof. When it blows, it goes straight up. Doesn't blow next door to the other building where they're also making this, that, or something else. All these things are still done that way. In typical fashion with the government and private enterprise, the first shipment of guns going from Hamilton, Ohio, are going to down to the Ohio River to Cincinnati, and they're going to get shipped over. They're going to end up in Louisville. The guns are shipped down to Cincinnati, and they're trying to put them on a steamboat to go to Louisville. The steamboat operator says, wait a minute, nobody's paid me yet to take these guns to the federal arsenal. And we're not going to move them until you pay. So now the guns are hung up in Cincinnati because nobody's paid yet. So Gwin and Campbell has to correspond back with the government saying, hey, pay the shipper so the guns can go where you want them. Ultimately, the guns went to, and I probably have information of at least 12, 15 different units were issued guns. Unfortunately, these being carbines designed for the cavalry. Most of the Gwin and Campbell guns were in a lot of different battles here and there, but they weren't in all the famous battles. They weren't at Gettysburg and some of the great big battles like that. Cavalry's job, of course, was to get on your horse, ride to where the battle was going to be, dismount, and fight dismounted. There, cavalry battles, yes, but the Ordnance Board at that time, during the Civil War, still thought that the cavalry should be issued a saber and a pistol. You don't need a gun, you don't need a rifle, because that's one shot on horseback you have to do all this stuff with, and you got to No, if your pistol's with you, you have 6 shots already loaded, your saber's with you, and if you ever looked at a Civil War saber, it is not sharp. They never sharpen them down because you might cut yourself. But you can cut somebody else on horseback when you're riding and you swing that, it will do just as much damage as if it was razor sharp. So the Ordnance Board, how we fought wars at that time, brought about all these different things about guns and their manufacturing. And that is the thumbnail sketch of how they came into business. How did they disappear? The war's over. The government's not going to give you any contracts. There's warehouses, arsenals full of arms. The civilian market doesn't need guns. They already had guns. If you were hunting for food, you already had a hunting gun. There was not a lot of sport shooting in 1865. Sport shooting came about later when Creedmoor and some of those places came out as, hey, let's be marksmen and all. And of course, we know that after 1865, we still had a lot of things to do with out west and this and that. These guns being single-shot percussion instruments of war, they were outdated when they were made. We already had metallic cartridges that you could feed into a magazine called a Henry or Winchester rifle. And you could fire, you had a Spencer rifle. You had ammunition that you could drop, oops, and pick it back up. You had ammunition you could drop in the rain, in a puddle, pick it back up, and it was not destroyed. Many bullets for all of these different types of patent carbines can be found on display tables here, and you can buy them. They're all brand new, never been shot bullets. Because if you picked it out and it came apart, you threw the bullet down. Metal detectors today will find a spot where a man stood, and there's 10 brand new bullets laying in the dirt. They fell apart. You dropped the lead. You wouldn't have kept it. You don't know anything. You threw it away. So there's always new bullets for all these patent carbines that never got shot. After the war, there were a couple companies that made bullets that would fit the Gwin and Campbell guns, and you could buy it because these guns, the military still had some, and all this and that. In 1905, when the arsenals, the governments decided that everything in these arsenals is obsolete. Let's sell it all. So they began selling off stuff. Guns like these Gwin and Campbells would have went out the door at the arsenal at an auction for $2 a piece. If the gun wasn't pretty, or if the gun had a foible and it didn't want to work, they sold it for $2 a pound. So you could, in fact, it would have been less than that. They sold whatever the scrap price was, and you would have taken, somebody would have bought it as scrap, took the metal, melted it back down, done something else, burnt the wood, and been done. The guns came to us then after 1905 from the arsenals when they were sold for $2 a piece at the arsenal. And today, if you go out here in the hunted Ohio gun collectors, everybody's looking to make double their profit, so you can buy them for $4 a piece. Oh yes, doubling your profit's a great idea. As I spoke earlier there, many of the guns will be absolutely mint. They were in arsenals, they never got issued. If the gun's all beat up and something's missing or this and that, it probably got issued. And there are records. We do have records of what units carried the guns. We have records of where the battles were, and we also know how many guns were shipped to arsenals and probably were never issued anywhere. So you can find all kinds of categories. There's all kinds of variations in the guns, from the earliest gross patent that existed to when Gwin and Campbell repatented in 1862 when they had changed some of the mechanism. They were allowed to get a patent on just the changes. All these different patent changes were called improvement patents. You could hold a patent, I could see what you did, and I could say, I'm going to change something. I get an improvement patent on what you did. I'm not violating yours because I changed it. It's an improvement. Now, let's go backwards for a second. 1863, the war is still on. Gwin and Campbell are making carbines and selling them under contract to the government. Mr. Gross is still sitting in Hamilton, Ohio, twiddling his thumbs going, man, I got rid of that patent way too soon. If I still had involvement, somebody'd be sending me a check. What does he do? He's a gun maker. He says, I will make another gun. I will get another patent. He files his new patent in 1863. The patent office says, you know, you're infringing upon your own patent of 1859. He says, well, maybe. The patent office, of course, is slammed. The patent office went from having, in theory, very few patents on record to everybody's an inventor now. The patent office says, we'll give you your patent on your own gun that you already had, and basically, you guys fight it out. So, Mr. Gross, now in Tiffin, Ohio, he has to submit 2 guns to the Ordnance Board for inspection to get an approval to get a contract. He makes 2 guns. Now, out of the clear blue, he has 2 guns made. This is one of the 2 guns he had made. One gun went to the Senate quartermaster, or to the state quartermaster. The other gun was sent to the Congressional Standing Committee on Military Affairs. So wherever he went to have all these parts made again, machined and all that, it's stamped again with Gross Patent, 1863. He sends these 2 guns off. The government says no. By 1863, they've got guns flowing in from the other patents. They say no. This is one of the 2 guns that he sent. We don't believe that he made any other guns or had any other guns made at that time that he sent. They said no. End of his story, ultimately. But he had tried again, just hoping to cash in on something. And when he did it again, he put back the 900-yard sight. That's because that was his thought. I'm going to shoot this gun 900 yards and hit something. That is pretty much how they came, where they came from. Oh, what happened to everybody? Yes, we have to end the story somehow. Mr. Gross in Tiffin, Ohio, he decided then, since nobody will give him a contract for carbines, he decides to make pistols, revolvers. And he made several different model revolvers. And he's, again, just a local gunsmith in Ohio, so I don't think he ever made enough guns to have them in a store anywhere. But if you were in Tiffin, Ohio, he had them sitting there probably in his shop, and you could buy a pistol. They weren't military caliber or anything. They, I believe, were 32 caliber, and it's just a personal pistol that you would carry for personal use. He wasn't trying to make a military arm and never tried to get a military contract. After that didn't work out, by the late 1860s, he now is hired by the Hall Safe Company down in Cincinnati. He also has several patents on time locks for safes. So he goes to Cincinnati, works for the Hall Safe Company. And whether they used any of his patents, I've never been able to figure out whether they owned his patents or he still owned them, but he has, they're in the patent office as his patent. He disappears at that point from what happened next. When he died, we don't know where he's buried. We think his wife was in Chicago at the time of his death, probably with one of his kids living there. I don't know what age she would have been necessarily, but we think that's where she was. But he was in Cincinnati. Was he buried in Chicago? Was he buried here? Nobody knows yet. Mr. Gwynn, Mr. Entrepreneur, the war's over. The Gwynn and Campbell Company is not making guns anymore. They're making patent broom heads. And I'm not sure what this thing looks like, other than I'm thinking maybe it's metal. Maybe it's the top of a broom where the bristles would come out, the patent broom head. They're doing that. They're not doing a land office business in patent broom heads. Mr. Campbell at this time, he has got into some mixed up things. He was the 7th wealthiest man in Hamilton, Ohio when they started their association. By this time, he is forging bank documents, writing Mr. Gwynn's name on there. Mr. Gwynn finds out, has to go to court and say, Judge, it's not me. I didn't sign this note. Why did he have to sign a note? What happened to Mr. Campbell's money? What happened to the property he owned? We don't know. Why did he do that? Mr. Campbell ends up dead from delirium tremors, which is alcohol poisoning. Mr. Gwynn, the war is over. At that point then, that confrontation with Mr. Campbell about the forgery on the banknote, they dissolve the company of Gwynn and Campbell. It is over. The assets were ordered by each to liquidate the company, and Mr. Campbell's left over here by himself with his forged banknote. He ultimately dies. Mr. Gwynn, now he goes back to Springfield, and he then goes overseas selling farm equipment. He dies in the Netherlands in 1869, selling farm equipment made in Springfield, Ohio, which was one of the big towns that had multiple farm implement manufacturers. They bring him back. He is buried in Springfield. Mr. Gwynn's family, his kids all became professional people. His kids became superintendents of banks and this and that, things like that. His kids all became very professional people. I don't know much about Mr. Campbell's kids or if Mr. Campbell even had kids and what happened to them. I'm sure he did. I've been to his gravesite, and there are other names there, but I haven't tied together who they were and what they did. Mr. Gross disappeared. We don't know where he's buried, but we do know he was working down at the Hall Safe and Lock Company. And that's kind of how the company ended. In the period of time then, when Mr. Gross started making guns in Tiffin, Ohio in the early 1850s, by 1859 he has the patent for the carbine and on. That's kind of where the story started, and by the late 1860s, when Mr. Gwynn and Mr. Campbell dissolved their partnership, the story's over, and the gentlemen pass on into history. Thank you for coming. I'll entertain any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
What's the approximate price range these go for currently?
Okay, if you were walking around out here at the show and saw a moderate looking gun, in other words, it's not perfect condition and it's nothing wrong with it, you might expect to pay somewhere between $1,800 and $2,200. If it is really mint, the dealers will love to tell you that it's $3,200 or $3,500. If you go online, no price too high. Some of the models are rarer because of what they are. The earlier guns that were first done by Mr. Gross and Mr. Gwynn all had a Cosmopolitan name stamped on them. By the time Gwynn and Campbell as individuals are together, they are still making guns under the Cosmopolitan name. It is when Gwynn gets the improvement patent in 1862 that the guns now all become stamped Gwynn and Campbell. So if you have a gun stamped Cosmopolitan, it is an older gun or the original series of guns with the original patent, and that will bring a premium. And then there's all of the odd things that they did with the changes. The pre-change guns in Cosmopolitan or Gwynn and Campbell will sometimes bring a premium over something else. One of the things that happened here, this is a Cosmopolitan. It was not made as a military gun. It was made as a sporting rifle. It is 40 caliber instead of 52 caliber, so it's more of a hunting gun. It has the original 1859 patent exactly. This is the gun that Mr. Gross said should be built. It's got a totally different sight. It's a sporting gun. The mechanism that's in here, it has this little breech block. You pull it out and there's half a dozen parts screwed together. Later, when they started changing things, it became just a solid block of iron, and gosh, that works. The connections back here, they used a double loop thing coming back. It's not two triggers. This releases and allows the loop to move. Well, this is problematic. That little spur back at the back had to line up when you're yanking it back perfectly in the little slot, which if you move it in either direction, that's not going to work. It's jammed. It's not a good wartime item. The buckhorn sight back here at the back, no. We want a fixed sight that, and again, let's go 900 yards, sure. Things that changed through the years on the guns, they had a very pronounced butt plate with a lot of curve. Ultimately, they produced in the later guns less curve. If you look at this one sitting here, you can just see the curve difference between the two. What does that do for you? Nothing, in my opinion. Oh, something else really unique to the guns, which will change price. Well, it affects it both directions. When you look at the Gwin and Campbell guns, you can come to my table or look online. You'll find guns with 2 or 3 sets of serial numbers. This is true. This is not wrong. It's not bad. What we think happened was that when a gunsmith was fitting all of the components together, he hand fit them, which every one of these guns had to be hand fit. You think that you made each part so that it would automatically fit the other part? No. You're going to have to file this. You're going to have to fit that. You'll gunsmith them together. What we think happened for the double sets, triple sets of numbers was the gunsmith fit them together. The guns were all stamped originally with serial numbers. It came apart. Again, the locks, the breeches, everything came apart, went to get case hardened. Somebody, we think, at the case hardening place stamped another set of numbers on them. They didn't use the original numbers. Sent them back. Now they're case hardened. They reassemble them. Many of these guns have 2 or 3 sets of numbers. There are alphanumeric numbers, which we have no clue why they did that. We do not know what they did. A gentleman showed me a gun earlier this morning, and it had 2 different sets of numbers on it. Absolutely. And they're different fonts. So that leads me to believe that, yes, it's somebody else somewhere. It's not the same people sitting at the table next to him doing something. It went out someplace, came back. Got to remember, these factories were all trying to make stuff as fast as they could, but they weren't forging these parts. They obviously had to go, we don't know who or where, but somebody cast the metal parts, sent them to them. They had to hand fit everything to make them work. There are guns with no serial numbers. And that would be just a one-of idea that was probably made in the shop of Mr. Gross, and for some reason there was no serial number, nothing put on. Most of all of the Gwin and Campbell guns that were government guns are stamped Union rifle. We have no idea what a Union rifle is. Is that the Union as opposed to the South? We don't know. Is it you're in a Union? We don't know. It's a Union rifle. It's stamped on the side of all the Gwin and Campbells. What's a Union rifle? We don't know. Because they were making government contracts and trying to get them out the door as fast as they could, they weren't worried about fancy. There are some presentation Gwin and Campbells out there. And the presentation part means they have fancier wood in the stocks. There's really nothing else they could do or would do different. It's just fancier looking stock. That was a presentation gun. There exists in the world, I'll tell you one more story and then I'm done. There exists in the world a gun, a Gwin and Campbell gun that is all engraved. It's beautiful engraving with flowers on it. That's not a military engraving. And the story on this gun was that it was going to be a presentation piece to Mr. Grant, but Mr. Grant just never got it. So it was in a magazine, printed, told the story was this is a presentation piece to Mr. Grant, and he never got it. A couple years later, somebody else comes back and goes, you know, I'm an engraver. And that's not American engraving. It's Mexican engraving. Somebody had the gun, and a Mexican engraver engraves flowers and stuff on it, and it's engraved all up and down the barrel. Any place there's metal, it's engraved with all this really pretty stuff. But it's not the normal engraving you might do as, hey, I want it to look like this. So, no, that was bogus. It was never meant for Mr. Grant. We don't know of anything at all where any famous people were, you know, Mr. Lincoln didn't get one of these. There's no stories like that we have. They were just scrambling to try to get a government contract filled and out the door. Thank you.
So,
What about how many of the Type 1s were made before they transitioned to Type 2? Was there kind of a serial number break point?
Yes. I could look that up right now and give you the answer. All the answers are contained, this is my public service announcement, in the book that was written by Mr. Rensler. He has all the facts and figures of how many of each model, where they went, when they were, the contract, when they were delivered, where the contract was shipped to, all of those things. Yes, I could sit here for 5 minutes. I could tell you the answer. Those answers are all known through the government contracts and everything, and all that good stuff.
So I have another question.
Yes.
Normally, yes, there's a serial number on them. There's also inspector stamps.
Yes.
Cartouches.
Cartouche,
and
mhm.
Inspector stamps. Did they all get government inspector stamps on the stock, or are some made without those?
Thank you. I was going to mention that too. Before the government would accept a contract and pay for it, they had to have their government inspector inspect it. The government inspector then would stamp the gun with a little cartouche. Many of these guns you'll find with double cartouches of all the different patent arms during the Civil War. We'll have double, some even triple cartouches. That means at some point somebody looked at it. It doesn't necessarily mean they were looking for anything bad or anything had been broken or anything, but in theory, the government inspector went to the Gwynn and Campbell factory and looked at them, inspected them, stamped it. They went in a box, in a wooden shipping box, and off they went. They get to an arsenal. At some point in the arsenal time, somebody there might have looked at it, and again, boom, it's another stamp that the guy, that was his job to look at it again. He stamped it again that he had looked at it.
I have one that doesn't have a cartouche stamp.
Yeah,
on it.
no biggie at all. And the thought there that I would have would be, hey, it's quitting time. Stick that thing over in the box, and the inspector who has come from parts unknown to be in Hamilton, Ohio to inspect, he says, yeah, I'm going home too. Stick it in the box, nail the lid on it, and off it goes.
I didn't know if they had any commercial sale.
No.
That they wouldn't have been stamped. So.
No, they virtually have no known commercial sale. They never appeared in anybody's stores or anything. The only commercial sales are the guns that we have today, which went to places like Bannerman, bought wholesale stuff, and the other guy in New York, yes, the big guy. Thank you. Yeah, any of those guys, they were the guys that would come in and buy, and there are records on arsenal sales as to how many Gwynn and Campbells went where. Those are in other books too by Macaulay. He has arsenal sales records for all the different carbines, how many, condition, what price they sold at, and this and that. So you can almost track where your gun might have went and how it got back in the market.
So the last question I had, this kind of mechanism with that, it's a cammed block, right? It's not just falling, it's kind of a cammed block.
Right.
Is not unlike the Burnside.
Right,
Burnside seals better with the cartridge.
right.
Was there any debate about that kind of interchange between that design from Glenn Campbell, or would have been from Gross, his patent, to Burnside and his development of that articulated block that they were aware?
No, I don't think they would have.
Okay.
I don't think they would have. Each inventor would have said, well, I'm going to do mine, if I looked at yours, I'm going to do mine different so I can get a patent. If I copy you too closely, you'll want to argue with me. So I'm going to sit down and decide mine. And of course, these inventors drew all this stuff on paper first. They didn't build the gun. I don't think they built the gun first and said, hey, since this works, I think I'll draw up a picture and get a patent. They said, this logically has to work, which the logic fell out the...
Looks good on paper.
Yeah, looked real good on paper, the actual practical use. Yes, sir.
Did you ever run across the address for Gross's store or factory in Tiffin?
Yes.
Do you know what
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you what it is. It's in the book. Yeah, I keep saying it's in the book. I'll gladly go open up the book, and we'll spend the next hour answer each question for you, because it's there. Supposedly, his address, whatever it was right across the street from where Gwynn was setting up the gas company. So the happenstance that the two of them got together and even talked about something was, hey, I'm standing here at my gas company and your gun shop's over here, and I think I'll wander over here and we'll talk.
Can I add a quick aside?
Sure.
Just from personal experience. My son, excuse me, my youngest son is a graduate of Tiffin University. So our family, my family, has had ample occasion to spend a lot of time in Tiffin.
So have I.
Okay, well,
71 years.
is that all?
That's so.
Well, you got to be.
I got that experience.
But anyway, as I understand it, and if you explore some of the historical sites in the greater Tiffin area and so forth and so on, Tiffin became a glass manufacturing center because of the presence of natural gas. And there is a glass museum on the main drag in downtown Tiffin that I've been through, beautiful pieces of glass. Well, why was glass big? Well, they had the natural gas, the resource, to get it to be in the glass business. So there they are, you know.
Mr. Gwynn, when he would set up your gas company, he never made himself the president or a stockholder or anything. He pretty much said, I'll show you how to do it, and you guys do all that. So all these different towns that he went to and set up gas companies, his name never appeared as a president or board or anything. So my guess would be that he said, okay, hey, you guys have paid me to do this. Goodbye, I'll see you later. I'm going to the next town and we'll set this up. That's one thing too that I usually mention too in talking about this. Being in Hamilton, Ohio, they're right there on the river. Being right there on the river, they're able to have a mill race. The mill race powered the factories. They had 3 different factories in 3 different locations in Hamilton, and they were all powered by water, as all these factories were back then. The steam engines and stuff that they had would have cost too much money, and they didn't do that. And they didn't have time to do some of that stuff. So hey, here comes the mill race. We'll put each of the factories on the mill race, and now we got a water wheel that powers everything. We run the pulleys and the straps and everything that they run, and that's how they did everything.
I got one
Yes, sir.
follow-up question. When the company figured out that they had to ramp up production of the cartridges, have you run across any indication that they might have procured the black powder for the cartridges from King Powder Company?
No, you know, there were several powder companies in and around Cincinnati and that area. We don't know who made the cartridges, so we have no clue where the powder would have come through.
They would not have necessarily been directly procuring the powder anyway, because somebody else did the ultimate manufacture of the cartridges.
Probably, yeah. Whoever's making the cartridges
Right. Okay.
was in charge of that. At one point, when there was the shortage of materials in the cartridge manufacturing, the Gwynn and Campbell Company said, we can send you the cartridges that we have had made, but we cannot buy caps on the open market. They're not available. So you, the government, have to provide the caps. So the government's suddenly in a quandary, okay, if it's not on the open market for you, it's going to be tough for us. So at some points, the federal government had to actually enter into some of those contract arrangements to provide the caps and all to put with the cartridges. And if you could imagine cartridges being shipped without caps someplace, they're just going to set because they're totally useless.
Are there any surviving arsenal packs of this ammo?
No, the survival rate of the ammo, which was thought through quite heavily by Mr. Rensselaer that wrote the book, he himself had a handful of actual original cartridges that he found. He, as he tells the story, he never found more. I have one that I found someplace, And he had looked at it, and he validated that, yes, that's one. There's several other individuals in the collecting world that have one, maybe two. Of the 6,300,000 cartridges, where did they go? It's probably, if the arsenals dumped that stuff in bulk, whoever bought it took them apart. They had lead to remelt. They had gunpowder to redo, and they could do that. The linen or paper cartridge will throw that away and do that. So of 6,300,000 cartridges, why is there only a handful of ammo? It's paper or linen. And other than this particular gun, it has no use at all. There was a couple companies after the war that produced cartridges that would fit the Gwynn and Campbell's. Is it Lovell, Lovell company, made cartridges, and it says right on there for the Cosmopolitan or Gwynn and Campbell carbines, because they knew these guns would still be out there in some form. And that's another question too. After the, today's modern military, you get done serving wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, you don't get to take your gun home with you. It's not yours. It's the government. You give it back. In theory, that's what should have happened during the Civil War. But you have to remember that there's a lot of battlefield pickups that the citizens walked out on the battlefield or here and there, and they picked it up. Now they've got it, and they're not going to turn it back into the government. And if somebody, when the war's over and everybody turns around and walks home, the government's not asking you to bring back your gun and your canteen and your cartridge box and all. So there had to be a lot of guns that just came back into the civilian market at that point. So there was enough guns out there, I believe, that the strictly ammo manufacturers actually manufactured ammo that would fit this gun for X number of years after the government had them. Thanks again, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And my commercial message, of course, is, yes, we sell the books. It's shameless, but all the information of any question you have about what gun you had or seen is there. It'll tell you what you've seen or what you have, and it'll tell it. There's also a great bibliography in the back that tells a couple other links that are fantastic. In 1977, there's a guy doing a master thesis at Ohio State. He did a master thesis on production of guns during the Civil War with Gwynn and Campbell as his example. And he tells minutia in there that in his 70-some pages, you go, why do I need to know that? He found this information. There's another really great series in 6 issues of Gun Report magazine in August of 2000. In August of 2000, a man and his wife did this 6 articles equaling 77 pages in 6 different consecutive gun reports. And it's on Gwynn and Campbell. They found stuff that Mr. Rensler didn't know about. They had to have spent 10,000 hours in the National Archives reading, looking for, this leads to this, which, well, let's go look here, da-da-da-da. If you can find those gun reports, get those, buy them and look at them. I've got 2 sets, and I'll buy as many sets as I can find. I got them originally when they were new. Right at that time, a little bit of scuttlebutt, right at that time, Mr. Rensler's book hadn't come out yet. When I first met him, and he befriended me, he hadn't published the book yet. But I had a display here at Ohio Gun Collectors, and I had, I think 6 or 7 guns, early years there. And he said, hey, I saw your display at the gun show, and da-da-da-da-da, and da-da-da-da. Ultimately, through the years, I've been into his house. I did this and that. I bought guns that he had in Gwynn Campbell's. Just as his book's getting ready to get published, this 6-issue gun report comes out. And I said, what do you think of that? And it was stuff he didn't know, but somebody else had spent 10,000 hours and found it and delineated it. And it's definitive about the 3 different factories and why there were 3 different factories and when they did this and that and something else. So there's a lot of information out there that could be found. It's in his bibliography if you could go looking for a couple other things. And there's always the normal sources. You can look at the government records that are published in little books and this and that. A lot of stuff can be found. Very interesting topic. Why do I collect these things? I'm from Ohio. I'm from Springfield. Mr. Gwynn was from Springfield. He's buried in a cemetery in Springfield, and I go there all the time. I talked to him. I said, thank you. It's been fun. It's great. Thank you. Thanks again.